Hello, welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from the past, old newspaper articles in the public domain. We look at them with our modern eyes, our modern perspective, and see what we can learn from them. On this microfiche time capsule, we are looking back at the Biographical Encyclopedia, Volume 1, and this article is entitled Kimball, Heber Chase. So, Heber C. Kimball. This is a counselor in the First Presidency with Brigham Young. He was also a close friend of Brigham Young. They were, I think, neighbors growing up, both of the original 12. And I believe they were very close together in the 12 because they were close to the same age, Brigham Young being slightly older. What do I know about his life? Not a lot, actually. All I know is that they were basically neighbors and they joined the church at the same time, he and Brigham Young. And I know that Brigham Young used to call him his prophet. So he used to give much more spiritual kinds of talks and would make predictions and things like that. I don't know exactly what about, but it'll be interesting to see if they mention that. But yeah, as far as his life goes, I don't know a lot about him. He was a polygamist, but so was basically all of the First Presidency back in the day. So let's find out. I know that he had a few relatively well-known children / grandchildren. He was the father of J. Golden Kimball, I believe, and he was the grandfather, I believe, of Spencer W. Kimball. I will fact check that at the end just to be sure. But yeah, that's about all I know. So let's find out more about him. Yeah, Kimball, Heber Chase, first counselor to President Brigham Young from 1847 to 1868, was born June 14th, 1801. Oh, so see, he was just younger than Brigham Young, who was born June 1st. Yeah. So it's pretty crazy. At Sheldon, Franklin County, Vermont. He was the son of Solomon F. Kimball, born 1771, who was the son of James Kimball, born 1736, who was the son of Jeremiah Kimball, born 1707, who was the son of David Kimball, born 1671, who was the son of Benjamin Kimball, born 1637, who was the son of Richard Kimball, or Kemble, who was born at Rattlesden, County of Suffolk, England in 1598, and who emigrated to America in 1634, crossing the Atlantic in the ship Elizabeth, and settled in Massachusetts. I hate it when they go into, your ancestry. Who cares? If you had just said whose ancestors were from Suffolk, England, that would have been enough. I don't care that he's 6th generation American, He's American. Anyways, moving on. Heber C. Kimball removed from the rest of his father's family from Sheldon, Vermont, to West Bloomfield, Ontario County, New York in 1811. His father was a blacksmith and farmer. In 1806, Heber first went to school, continuing most of the time until he was 14 years of age, when he began to learn blacksmithing with his father. That's interesting because they mentioned Brigham Young having specifically only been to school for 11 days. Heber C. Kimball clearly went to school from age 5 and up through 14. So that's much longer, 11 years. Yeah, or 9 years. But 9 years of school is way different than 11 days. When he began to learn blacksmithing with his father, during the War of 1812, his father lost his property, and when Heber arrived at the age of 19, he found himself dependent on his own resources, and frequently suffering from the necessaries of life. Yeah, that sucks, but it does happen. His elder brother Charles, hearing of his destitute condition, offered to teach him the potter's trade. Well, that was kind. The offer was accepted, and he continued with his brother until he was 21 years old, so 2 years. In this interim, they moved to Mendon, Monroe County, where they pursued the pottery business. After having learned his trade, Heber worked 6 months for his brother for wages. Good. In November 1822, he married Valette Murray, daughter of Roswell and Susanna Murray, who was born in Florida, New York. I love there's a Florida, New York. Of course there is. June 1st, 1806. And immediately afterwards, he purchased the premises from his brother Charles and went into business for himself as a potter. Hang on a second. So he married in 1822 at the age of 21, and his wife, 16. She was 16. I'm always weirded out when very young people get married, but it was a thing. Afterwards, he purchased the premises from his brother Charles and went into business for himself as a potter, which trade he followed for upwards of 10 years. Sometime in 1823, he received the 3 first degrees of masonry, and in 1824, with 5 others, he positioned the chapter at Canandaigua, asking to receive all the degrees up to that of Royal Archmason. Well, that's cool. The petition was granted, but just previous to the time they were to receive those degrees, the anti-Masons burned the chapter buildings. Weird. In his early life, Heber C. Kimball received many pressing invitations to unite himself with the different religious sects of the day, but did not see fit to comply until a revival occurred in his neighborhood, shortly after which he and his wife were baptized, and they joined the Baptists. About 3 weeks after his occurrence, some elders of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints came from Pennsylvania to the residence of Phineas H. Young. In Victor, and learning of their arrival, curiosity prompted Heber to see them. And he then learned for the first time the everlasting gospel. He desired much to learn more, and in company with Brigham and Phineas H. Young and their wives, he started for Pennsylvania, where they stayed with the church 6 days, regularly attending the meetings. In April 1832, Alpheus Gifford called at Heber C. Kimball's shop. After a few moments' conversation, he expressed his readiness to be baptized, and he went with Elder Gifford to a small stream in the woods about 1 mile distant, where the holy ordinance was administered to him. Wow, really? That was in 1830, wasn't it? About 2 weeks later, his wife Villate was baptized by Joseph Young. Brother Kimball was ordained an elder by Joseph Young, and in company with him and Brigham Young, he preached in Genesee, Avon, and Lionstown, where they baptized many and built up branches. Wow, really? Hang on. So it sounds like he accepted the gospel way faster than Brigham Young did, because Brigham took 2 years. There's a picture. It's super fuzzy, but that's definitely him. I'm just going to skip that because, you'll be seeing pictures in the background. In September 1832, with Brigham and Joseph Young, he went to Kirtland, Ohio, and visited the prophet Joseph Smith. That was around the time that Brigham was baptized, was it not? Or he was a little bit earlier than that, yeah. In the fall of 1833, having sold his possessions, he started for Kirtland, accompanied by Brigham Young, arriving there about the 1st of November. May 5th, 1834, he left Kirtland in company with President Joseph Smith and about 100 others, and arrived in New Portage, where Zion's camp was organized. He was appointed captain of the 3rd Company. At the reorganization of the camp at Salt River, Missouri, he was selected as one of President Smith's lifeguards. Like a bodyguard? While on Fishing River, and after assisting to inter a number of the brethren who fell by the cholera, he himself was very severely attacked. Severely attacked by what? By cholera, you mean? Shortly after, he received an honorable discharge in writing, and in accordance with the instructions of President Joseph Smith, on the 30th he started for home, reaching Kirtland July 26th, okay? About 2 weeks after his return, he established a pottery and continued to work at his business until cold weather set in. In the winter of 1834-5, he attended the theological schools established in Kirtland. He was chosen and ordained one of the 12 apostles. February 14th, 1835, same day as Brigham Young. In May following, he started in company with his fellow apostles on a mission to the eastern churches, and visited, among other places, Sheldon, where he was born, preaching to his friends and relatives. He crossed the Green Mountains on foot and alone, and attended a conference in St. Johnsbury with the 12. Returning home, he met others of the 12 at Buffalo. They arrived at Kirtland September 25th. Elder Kimball attended the dedication of the House of the Lord at Kirtland, March 27th, 1836, and he received his washings and anointings with the 12 apostles. From May to October, he was engaged on a mission in the northern part of the United States. Having been called on a mission to England by the prophet Joseph, he left Kirtland in June 1837, accompanied by Orson Hyde, Willard Richards, and Joseph Fielding. As a passenger on the ship Garrick, he sailed from New York, July 1st, 1837, accompanied by other missionaries, and landed in Liverpool on the 20th. 2 days later they went to Preston, and on the following Sunday they preached in a church of the Reverend James Fielding to a large congregation. A number of people believed and rejoiced in the message they had heard. Mr. Fielding, however, shut his doors against the elders and would not suffer them to preach again in his church. But Elder Kimball and his companions continued to preach in private houses, on street corners, and in marketplaces, and by the Christmas they were about 1,000 and members of the church in England. 1,000 members of the church in England. The history of Apostle Kimball's first mission in England would make an interesting little volume of itself, as thrilling and accompanied by the power of God as thoroughly as was the travels of the Apostle Paul in southern Europe more than 18 centuries before. Yeah, I heard that. He had a crazy, crazy mission, but it's interesting because when we read about Brigham Young, they basically skipped over his mission. They almost didn't even mention it. And then Elder Kimball's mission was really, really crazy, yeah? It did, like, were they not there at the same time? It's interesting to me that one was really, really very eventful and the other wasn't. So, I don't know. It's interesting. Elder Kimball returned to Kirtland May 22, 1838, being absent 11 months, and with his associates was instrumental in baptizing nearly 1,500 persons and organizing large branches in various parts of England, thus opening and establishing the European mission, from which has come to the Church of Christ in the last days more than 100,000 people. It's crazy, right? How many came from England? Joseph Smith and other leading men having removed to Missouri, Elder Kimball removed with his family to Far West. They journeyed chiefly by water on the Ohio, Mississippi, and Missouri rivers, reaching Far West July 25, 1838, and enjoyed a happy meeting with the prophet and other leading men. Elder Kimball immediately set to work, building a small house for his family. During its erection, the family lived in a small shanty about 11 feet square, so low that Elder Kimball could scarcely stand upright in it. Yeah, he was pretty tall, wasn't he? During the summer, he went with the prophet Joseph and others to Daviess County to afford the saints protection against mob violence. At the invasion of Far West by the mob militia, Elder Kimball was present to offer his life or undergo any ordeal that might come upon the saints. He visited in company with President Young, the prophet, in prison, and did all he could to secure his release, and was also active in providing for the comfort of the wounded and helpless who had suffered from the outrages of their enemies. He attended the secret conference on the temple grounds April 26, 1839, at which Wilford Woodruff and George A. Smith were ordained apostles, and afterwards went with the 12 to Quincy, Illinois, where his family awaited him. From thence he moved to Nauvoo, where he built him a residence. It's interesting wording, where he built him a residence. In September 1839, together with President Brigham Young, he started for England on his second mission. He was hailed with delight by his former acquaintances throughout the mission. He labored with great diligence for over 1 year. They reached Liverpool April 6, 1840, and returned to Nauvoo July 1, 1841. He was elected a member of the Nauvoo City Council October 23, 1841, and labored in various capacities to promote the growth and development of the city and the church. From September to November 1842, he, with Brigham Young, George A. Smith, and Amasa M. Lyman, labored diligently in Illinois to allay excitement, remove prejudice, and correct false doctrines. In July 1843, he went on a preaching mission to the eastern states, returning to Nauvoo October 22nd of the same year. In May 1844, he started for Washington, D.C., to petition the authorities of the nation to redress the grievances heaped upon the saints by their enemies in Missouri and Illinois. On his return trip, he heard the sad news of the martyrdom of Joseph and Hiram Smith. Apostle Kimball was active in sustaining the saints in the great affliction by his encouraging counsels, and united with his brethren to finish the Nauvoo temple, and in any way nobly met, under trying circumstances, the responsibilities of his high calling as an apostle of the Lord. What the people suffered, he suffered, and the labors which they performed were his also. After the trying experiences of the exodus from Nauvoo and the journey to winter quarters, he became one of the historic 148 who constituted the pioneer company that entered Salt Lake in July 1847. Yeah, I remember that. Elder Kimball was one of the foremost men in all of the important labors incidental to founding a great commonwealth in a desert land. In December 1847, when President Young was sustained as president of the church, Apostle Kimball was chosen as his first counselor, and sustained this position with credit and ability until his death in 1868. He was also lieutenant governor in the provisional state of Deseret until his decease. For a number of years he was a member of the Legislative Council, the last 3 years being president of that body. He was ever constant in his devotion to the church, the state, and the nation. He was a typical American, like his ancestors for many generations. He officiated in the house of the Lord. He visited every settlement in Utah, most of them many times, preached the gospel, uttered many prophecies which have received literal fulfillment, and gave counsel, spiritual and temporal, to advance the work of God upon the earth. In May 1868, he received a severe fall at Provo, which brought on sickness and resulted in his death. Really? June 22, 1868, at his home in Salt Lake City. He died as he had lived, true, full of faith, and in the hope of a glorious resurrection. President Kimball was a man of dignified bearing, standing about 6 feet in height and well proportioned. His complexion was dark and his hair thin. His piercing dark eyes seemed to penetrate one's very soul and read the very thoughts of the human heart. He was broad and magnanimous in his ways, kind to the widow and to the fatherless, beloved by his associates in the apostleship and by all saints. He fulfilled the characteristics of an honest man, the noblest work of God. Many times he told men what they had done and what would befall them, not by any human knowledge, but by the spirit of discernment and revelation. Told ya. Yeah, he, like Brigham Young called him his prophet. He had many odd sayings, which, said by him, left a lasting impression upon the hearers in public and private. Really, I hope they tell us some, because it sounds like fun, you know? Odd sayings are fun. With all his frank and fearless manner of telling the men what many would shrink from telling, he was a loving, peaceful man, and was designated as the herald of peace. During the hard times in Salt Lake City, President Kimball was so blessed with temporal subsistence, bread stuff chiefly, that he was able to feed his own numerous family, and loan to men considered much better financiers than himself. His special gift of the Spirit was that of prophecy. His predictions and their fulfillment would make a long chapter of themselves. Well, tell us some! And full of thrilling interest. When the saints were about to settle in Commerce, Illinois, and though received with open arms by the good people of Illinois, Apostle Kimball looked upon the beautiful sight and said sorrowfully, "This is a beautiful place, but not a long resting place for the saints." Interesting. Like, that's really cool. So we got one. We got one. Sidney Rigdon was vexed at the prediction, but its fulfillment is too well known to need repeating here. Yeah. When hard times pressed the saints in Salt Lake City and 1,000 miles separated them from commercial points, President Kimball stood up in the tabernacle and prophesied that in less than 6 months, clothing and other goods would be sold in the streets of Great Salt Lake City cheaper than they could be bought in New York. This astonished the people. One of the brethren said to him after the meeting that he did not believe it. "Well, neither did I," said Brother Kimball, "but I said it. It will have to go." No one saw the possibility of its verification. 6 months, however, had not passed away when large companies of emigrants, burning with gold fever from the east, came into the city, and becoming eager to reach the glittering gold fields of California, they sold their merchandise on the streets for a less price than the New York prices. Yeah. They sold their large animals for pack animals, and thus more than literally fulfilled the remarkable prophecy in President Heber C. Kimball. Yeah, I remember that one. That was crazy. There was a whole group of people coming in from the east and trying to get to California. And they're like, you know what? We got too much stuff. We're taking too much time. This is taking forever. Like, you know what? We need more money. So how about we just sell some of this stuff and sell it for like $5, you know? I don't care. Just take our stuff. And then we're lighter and we got a little more money and we can get going. And that's what they did. It was crazy. These are but examples of many like predictions uttered by the great apostle of the Lord. For further information, see Life of Heber C. Kimball by Orson F. Whitney, Contributor, Volume 8, Historical Record, Volume 5, page 33, Southern Star, Volume 2, page 345, and Faith Promoting Series, Book 7, etc. There you go. Lots of sources there. I don't feel like it was very specific on a lot of things, however. I am interested to see what Wikipedia has to say, because I suspect it will be more complete. Like, I didn't feel like that was very complete. I feel like there's a lot of holes. For example, they mentioned his first wife, who he married at a very young age, yeah? And they didn't mention any of his children. They didn't mention that he was the father of J. Golden Kimball, who a lot of people love. And he's kind of considered an icon. And they didn't mention he was the grandfather of Spencer W. Kimball, although I understand why, because this was written in like 1901. But at the same time, like, at least mention his son, who was at that time in the presidency of the 70s. Like, it wasn't unheard of. I don't know. Like, he was a well-known person. Anyways, they didn't mention his other wives. I know that he definitely married more than one wife. And I am curious as to, like, his family life. They didn't really mention his family life, and that bugs me a little bit. So let's read a little bit more about him. All right, Heber C. Kimball. Heber Chase Kimball, June 14th, 1801 to June 22nd, 1868, was a leader in the early Latter-day Saint movement. He served as one of the original 12 apostles in the early Church of the Latter-day Saints, and as first counselor to Brigham Young in the first presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS Church, for more than 2 decades, from 1847 until his death. Agreeing to take on plural marriage, then practiced by the Church, Kimball eventually married 43 women, but some relationships were for caretaking. He had a total of 66 children by 17 of his wives, which, by the way, is more than Brigham Young. Brigham Young had more wives, but he had fewer children. And, 66 children. That's crazy. 66 children. Wow. Early life. Heber Chase Kimball was born in Sheldon, Franklin County, Vermont on June 14, 1801. He was a descendant of the Kimball immigrants to Massachusetts from England in 1634. See? Very nicely summarized. He was named after Judge Heber Chase, who had helped the family in their efforts to settle in the area. I didn't know that either. That's interesting. His father, Solomon F. Kimball, worked as a blacksmith and maintained a farm. Due to the embargo on trade with Britain preceding the War of 1812, his father lost his investments, and the family moved to western New York, and they settled in West Bloomfield, New York, Ontario County around 1811. Education and training. Kimball left school at age 14, trained as a blacksmith and potter, and moved with his brother in about 1820 to Mendon, Monroe County, New York. There he married his first wife, the late Murray, in November 1822. After purchasing his brother's pottery business, for the next 10 years he carried out his trades. He acquired 5.5 acres of land, built a house and barn, and planted an orchard. Masonry. In 1823, Kimball received the three craft degrees of Freemasonry in the Lodge of Victor Flats, Ontario County, New York. In 1824, he sent a petition to the chapter at Canandaigua, New York, to receive the York Rite degrees of Royal Arch Masonry. His petition was accepted, although he reported anti-Masons had burned down the chapter building in Canandaigua. Many years later, Kimball reminisced of his New York Masonic experiences and stated, "I wish that all men were Masons and would live up to their profession. Then the world would be in a much better state than it is now." So what I understand about Masonry, Freemasons, is that they were kind of a ruling body to ensure that buildings were built properly, yeah? And since he was a potter, I could imagine that he was called upon to build, for example, fireplaces. Fireplaces need to be regulated, otherwise they won't draw properly and could start a building on fire. So I can understand why that needs to be regulated, and that he got the highest degree of regulation. That means that he is authorized to build almost anything, yeah? So I say good for him. That means that he was quite engineering minded, yeah? A little bit architecture in that direction. Anyways, I don't think that that's a bad thing, and I think people who think Freemasons are like a, secret society are a little bit silly. So, in general, it was all about regulating, the building of things. When the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints established itself in Nauvoo, Illinois, Kimball was one of the original petitioners to establish a Freemasonry lodge there. He served as Nauvoo Lodge's UD's first junior deacon. He remained active in Freemasonry throughout his stay in Nauvoo, but was not active once he moved to Utah Territory. There was no lodge in Utah in his lifetime that would admit Mormons. Well, that's shocking. You'd have to establish one yourself if you wanted to do that. And he didn't, because it was too far away from everyone else. Early family life. Several of Kimball's close family members died of tuberculosis within a few years. His mother in February 1824, his father in the spring of 1826, followed by his brother Charles C., and his brother's wife shortly thereafter. That's rough. His son William Henry was born in Mendon, April 10th, 1826. He was Kimball's first child to survive infancy. His daughter Helen Marr was born August 22nd, 1828. She was the only daughter to survive. Are you telling me that he has 66 children and only one daughter? I find that very hard to believe. I'm sorry, we're going to have to fact check that. Unless they mean his only daughter from that wife. Signs in the heavens. Kimball claims to have witnessed a miraculous event on September 22, 1827. According to his autobiography, he subsequently learned that it took place the same evening that Joseph Smith received the records of the Book of Mormon from the angel Moroni. He had seen a white smoke arising on the horizon, growing clear and transparent of a bluish cast to reveal an army on the move in platoons. We could see distinctly the muskets, bayonets, and knapsacks of the men, who wore caps and feathers like those used by the American soldiers in the last war with Britain. Also their officers with the sword and equipage, and heard the clashing and jingling of their instruments of war, and could discover the form and features of the men. The most profound order existed throughout the entire army. When the foremost man stepped, every man stepped at the same time. I could hear the step. When the front rank reached the western horizon, a battle ensued, and we can distinctly hear the report of the arms and the rush. No man could judge of my feelings when I beheld that army of men. As plainly as I ever saw armies of men in the flesh, it seemed as though every hair of my head was alive. This scenery was gazed upon for hours until it began to disappear. Wow, that's crazy. I never heard that story before. But that's crazy. Oh, cool, I didn't know this. Look at this picture. Pottery created by Kimball. He was a potter in his early life. Yes, he was. Lovely. Looks like the one is broken on the side, but like, good job. Like, that's nice. Huh. Joining the Latter-day Saint movement. While in New York, Kimball joined the local Baptist church and was eventually baptized. 3 weeks later, 3 elders from the Church of Christ, the original name of the Latter-day Saint Church, founded by Joseph Smith, visited the house of his friend Phineas Young. Kimball visited the house at this time and was impressed with church teachings. He also witnessed the speaking of tongues and the interpretation of tongues during his visit. He claims to have been visited by the power of God. During this time, Kimball said that he and several of the Young family saw a vision opened of the gathering of the saints to Zion. He was inspired to travel to Pennsylvania, where he could visit at length with the elders, and was accompanied by some of the Youngs. They stayed 6 days with the elders and witnessed more miracles, such as speaking in tongues and the interpretation of tongues. On April 16, 1832, Kimball was baptized by Alpheus Gifford in Mendon. The late Kimball followed him 2 weeks later. After the confirmation, the elder offered to ordain Kimball to the priesthood, but Kimball refused it as he felt he was unready. 30 more people were baptized in Mendon and formed a branch of the church there. Hang on a second. He was baptized in 1832. That's around the same time Brigham Young was baptized, which means that he didn't immediately accept it. He accepted it at the same time Brigham Young did, which was 2 years later. Yeah. I think it's weird that they didn't mention that, because he found out about the church the same time Brigham Young did in 1830. Because the Phineas Young got a Book of Mormon from Samuel Smith, and was the first missionary, who was called in 1830. He was basically just giving out Book of Mormons, or selling them, I think he was, because they couldn't afford to just give them away. So I think it's a little strange that they didn't mention that, and they don't mention his close friendship with Brigham either. Yeah. I think it's a little strange. I don't know why they're de-emphasizing that. Like, I understood that they were very close, and that was part of the reason that they got baptized together, is because they talked about religion together. That it was something that they discussed and they were both interested in. Shortly after his baptism, Kimball was ordained an elder by Joseph Young. He began proselyting in the neighboring areas with Joseph and Brigham Young. This part of New York became known as the Burnt Over District because of the numerous religious sects that sprang up during the 19th century. The Youngs baptized many people and built up branches of the church. Kimball said that one day Ezra Landon baptized some 20 people but wanted him to confirm them. He did so, and immediately they began speaking in tongues and interpreting them. In the fall of 1833, Kimball relocated his family to church headquarters in Kirtland, Ohio. He marched with Zion's camp in 1834. However, after contracting cholera, he returned to Kirtland before the rest of the crew. He then attended the School of Prophets and witnessed the completion of the Kirtland Temple. From 1832 until 1840, Kimball served 8 missions for the church, requiring him to be apart from his family for months at a time. Quorum of the 12. On February 14, 1835, Kimball was ordained a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles of the Church of the Latter-day Saints, renamed Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in 1838. He was one of the original 12 members of the quorum, being fourth in seniority. Joseph Smith called Kimball to lead a group of missionaries to England in 1834. The mission began work in Preston, Lancashire, England. This was the church's first proselyting effort in England. After the initial baptisms in Preston, the missionaries expanded their efforts to the Ribble Valley. By the time Kimball departed for the United States in 1838, about 1,500 people had been baptized. Kimball returned with a small party to make travel arrangements for the group and discovered the Latter-day Saints were undergoing considerable strife and pressure in the state of Missouri. While Smith was imprisoned in the Liberty Jail, Brigham Young, now ranking leader of the quorum, and Kimball organized the removal of approximately 12,000 Latter-day Saint refugees across the border into Illinois. There, the church founded the city of Nauvoo and built a temple. Kimball served on the Nauvoo City Council. That's interesting because I knew that Brigham Young was in charge of removing the saints from Missouri to Illinois, but I didn't, because we talked about that in the video about Brigham Young, but I didn't know Heber C. Kimball was that closely involved. I guess it does make sense that he was, but it didn't say it explicitly before. In September 1839, Kimball left Nauvoo for another mission to England. He did not reach Indiana until October. He made stops at Kirtland to encourage the remaining saints there to move to Nauvoo and other places, and had a long layover in New York City. He sailed from New York on December 19th, reaching Liverpool on April 6th. Can you imagine? Geez, that's 4 months at sea. 4 months at sea. Ugh. Kimball spent 1840 and some of 1841 in England, initially in the area in and around Preston, and later working as a missionary in London. The missionaries began organizing groups of British converts to travel to the United States beginning in 1840 and to join the main body of the church. After Smith was killed in 1844, succession to the leadership of the church was a divisive issue. Young led the majority of the church members across the state line into Iowa and eventually to the Salt Lake Valley. In July 1847, Kimball was one of the first Mormon pioneers to reach the valley. Kimball stood next in leadership in the quorum to Young. First Presidency. Kimball became a member of the new First Presidency in 1847. Kimball led one of 3 large companies to the Salt Lake Valley in the summer of 1848. He established his families in Utah Territory. He had 3 wives, and supporting them by farming, ranching, milling at the Heber C. Kimball grist mill, and freighting, in addition to church responsibilities. While in the First Presidency, Kimball received special assignments to supervise the ongoing British mission and to conduct temple ordinances. He also worked to encourage economic independence for Utah. At speaking in a meeting in the Salt Lake Tabernacle, Kimball promised his audience that in less than 6 months, clothing and other goods would be sold in the streets of Salt Lake City cheaper than they could be purchased in New York City. The ensuing California gold rush then made this promise possible. He used one slave, Green Flake, who was given to the church for tithing, as his personal driver. Oh my gosh, are you kidding me? Wow. Like, that almost negates other things. Jeez. Can you imagine giving a person to the church for tithing? I have 10 slaves, you can have 1. That's really disgusting. That's disgusting. And I feel really bad for that person. And I wish that Heber C. Kimball had thought to free him, and then maybe paid him wages for being his driver. It doesn't mean he doesn't do the job, but it means that he at least gets paid for it, has better conditions. Ugh, that's disgusting. Government service. When the provisional government of the state of Deseret was organized in the spring of 1849, Kimball was appointed the Chief Justice and Lieutenant Governor of the proposed state. Kimball served in the Utah Territorial Legislature in the Upper House, the Territorial Council, from 1851 to 1858. He was president of the council during the session beginning March 1851, but later served as a regular member of the council. Okay. Death. A personal friend of Kimball wrote, one night at family prayers, Kimball said that the angel Moroni had visited him the night before and informed him that his work on this earth was finished, and he would soon be taken. Kimball died the following day, on June 22, 1868, at age 67, in Salt Lake City, Utah Territory, from the effects of a fall. I wonder what happened. Was it like a blood clot, maybe, that got loose, while after falling, that, caused him to die? I know that it's quite common for people to die after a fall, but isn't it usually infection? Was it infection, or was it a blood clot? I guess those are probably the most common, following, side effects of a fall. I don't know. What do you think? Like, is there other things that I'm forgetting? Plus, they didn't mention what he fell on. Did he break a bone? You know, like, I don't know. I know it's possible. It is a thing. He was buried in the Kimball Whitney Cemetery, located on the south slope of what is now known as Capitol Hill, an area then called Heber's Bench, after him. Family. Yay! Information I was interested in. Kimball received private instruction from Joseph Smith on plural marriage, polygamy. Initially reluctant, Kimball accepted the responsibility and married a second wife, Sarah Noon. His first wife, the late Marie Kimball, accepted plural marriage after reportedly claiming independent revelation directly to her that it matched what the Lord has shown me. Okay. And welcomed the additional wives as sisters. Heber and Valette agreed to give their 14-year-old daughter, Helen Marr, as a plural wife to Joseph Smith. 14-year-old daughter. Kimball considered the marrying of multiple wives an expression of his faith in and obedience to God. I have noticed that a man who has but one wife and is inclined to that doctrine soon begins to wither up and dry, while a man who goes into plurality of wives looks fresh, young, and sprightly. Why is this? Because God loves that man and because he honors his work and word. Okay. Kimball eventually married a total of 43 women, although it is stated that many of these marriages were merely caretaking arrangements, lacking physical intimacy. The same with Brigham Young, yeah. Kimball had 66 children by 17 of his wives. And then there's also a list of wives and children, which I am not going to look at, but descendants. Kimball has a number of noteworthy descendants. Spencer W. Kimball was his grandson. Orson F. Whitney was his grandson. Natasha Rambova, I don't know who that is, great-granddaughter. Nick Udall, great-grandson. Edward L. Kimball, great-grandson. Quentin L. Cook, great-great-grandson. Miles Kimball, great-great-grandson. J. Golden Kimball was his son. Elias S. Kimball was his son. Richard Ian Kimball, who apparently gets no relation. Wow, I found that really interesting. To be honest, there wasn't a whole lot of negative. The only negative I had was him keeping a slave, which is a pretty big negative, I'm not going to lie. But it didn't seem like he ever did anything major that you would say, like, oh, he was a terrible person because. You don't know that much about his wives and children, but his, like, family life. I just feel like there wasn't a lot of negative. There seems to be that a lot of good things that he did, and he seemed very ready and willing to work. I don't know. He just seems like a really good dude in general, except for the keeping of a slave, but I understand that it was part of the time and it was debated at the time. Recalling that he died in 1868, which was shortly after the slaves were freed, after the Civil War, which means that hopefully he didn't have his slave after that. And but it was an accepted practice of the time, so I'm going to try not to judge him for that, although that is pretty bad, not gonna lie. Slavery, not great. But other than that, I feel like most of the things that he did and that he said and that he worked at were positive things, and he seems to be a very straightforward person. And I love that he made these great predictions, but they only mentioned 2. Plus the vision that he had, so I guess 3 total. I would like to have heard more, and how many of them did come true, and if any of them were just not something that happened. Just out of curiosity, because as I have mentioned in my other video on Brigham Young, in order to correctly judge someone, you have to weigh them in the balance. Did what they do have more positive or negative? But it sounds to me like they only mentioned predictions that came true. Well, you could, people do the same thing with Nostradamus, saying that he made all these predictions that came true, therefore, he must be a true prophet or whatever. But we don't know that about Heber C. Kimball. We can only guess that that's the case because they only mentioned a few predictions that he made that did come true. So did he ever make any that didn't? Just a question throwing out there. Anyways, I'm glad they did mention his well-known, descendants. But I found that very interesting. What do you think of Heber C. Kimball? Do you think he was a good person, or does the negative outweigh the positive? Anyways, I hope you liked the video today, and if you did, give it a like and subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.